Jackson Wylie burned the letter on a Tuesday morning. He stood at the kitchen stove, held the envelope over the flame, and watched his own words curl black at the edges. The words he'd written to a matchmaking agency 3 months ago. Words he'd never told a single soul. Plain, practical, quiet. That was what he'd asked for. That was what a man like him deserved. Not beauty, not softness. Not the kind of woman who made a grieving man forget every promise he'd made to the dead. He burned it. And then he heard the wagon pull up. If this story moves something inside you, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The wagon driver didn't even bother getting down from his seat. "You Jackson Wylie?" the man called, squinting against the summer glare. "That's me." "Got a delivery." Jackson wiped his hands on his work trousers and walked toward the road. He'd been mending fence since before dawn. His shoulders ached. His boots were caked with red dirt. He hadn't shaved in 4 days, and he smelled like a man who'd earned his living the hard way, which was exactly what he was. He wasn't expecting the woman. Not this woman. Not any woman who looked like this. She was standing beside the wagon with her back straight and her chin level, one hand resting on a travel trunk that had seen better days. Her dress was simple, plain cotton, dusty from the road, the color of old cream. Her hair was pulled back tight, the way women did when they meant business. And her face, God help him, her face was the kind that made the air go quiet. Not beautiful the way paintings were beautiful. Beautiful the way a thunderstorm was beautiful. The kind that made a man feel small and stupid and uncomfortably alive all at once. Jackson stopped walking. "You're early," he said, because he had to say something. The stage was ahead of schedule. Her voice was steady, measured, like she'd been practicing it. "I'm Lillian Hawke. I believe you've been corresponding with the Whitmore Agency." "I have." "Then I believe that makes me your—" She paused, just a half second, but he caught it. "Your prospective bride." Jackson looked at her. Then he looked at the wagon driver, who was already flicking his reins like he had no interest in being part of whatever came next. "Hold on," Jackson called after him. "You sure you got the right place?" The driver shrugged without turning around. "Letter said Wylie Ranch. That's what the sign says. That's where I stopped." The wagon rolled on. Jackson and the woman stood in the road, 20 feet apart, the summer heat pressing down on both of them like it had a personal grievance. He spoke first. "The agency wrote me. Said the woman they were sending was—" He stopped. "Plain?" she said quietly. He didn't answer. "I know what it said." There was no anger in her voice, just that same careful steadiness, like she was holding herself together from the inside. "I read the correspondence. I know what kind of woman you asked for." "Then you understand my confusion." She looked at him straight on. "I understand it perfectly. I also don't have anywhere else to go, Mr. Wylie. So if you're thinking of sending me back, I'd ask you to at least let me sit down first. It's been 3 days on that stage." He stood there another moment. The wind came through and lifted a strand of her hair loose from that tight knot she'd pinned it into, and it crossed her cheek, and she didn't move to fix it. He picked up her trunk. "Kitchen's through the front door," he said. "There's water in the pitcher on the counter. I'll be outside." He stayed outside for a long time. He told himself he was checking the fence line on the south pasture. He told himself he needed to water the horses. He told himself a dozen ordinary things that kept him away from the house for the better part of 2 hours, until the sun had moved enough that even he couldn't pretend there was still work left to do at that end of the property. When he came back in, She had made coffee. He hadn't asked her to. He hadn't even told her where it was kept. She was standing at the window, not looking out at the view, not admiring anything. Just standing there the way a person stands when they're thinking hard and don't want anyone to know it. She turned when he came in and poured a cup without being asked and set it on the table. "The stove took some coaxing," she said. "The flue's partly blocked. You'll want to clear it before winter or you'll have smoke problems." He sat down, wrapped both hands around the cup. "You know about stoves. I know about a great many things people wouldn't expect me to." "Such as?" She sat down across from him, folded her hands on the table. "Canning, livestock feed ratios, basic wound care, ledger keeping." She paused. "And how to tell when a man is trying to think of a polite reason to send her away." Jackson set down his cup. "I'm not trying to be polite about it," he said. "I'm trying to figure out what the truth is." "The truth about what?" "About who you are. Because the woman the agency described," he shook his head, "she wasn't you." Something moved behind her eyes, fast, like a fish underwater. There and gone. "No," she said carefully. "I don't suppose she was." "So who are you?" "I told you, Lillian Hawke, from Pennsylvania." Before Pennsylvania. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. "I don't think that's relevant," she said finally. "I think you know it is." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I run a quiet ranch, Miss Hawke. I don't have neighbors close enough to cause trouble. But I do have a reputation for keeping to myself and minding my own business. I like it that way. What I don't like is surprises." "I'm not a surprise. I'm exactly what you wrote for. A woman willing to work, willing to be a practical partner in running a household. That's what the agency promised, and that's what I intend to deliver." I wrote for a plain woman. The words came out harder than he meant them to. She didn't flinch. "And I imagine that's what you'll get, Mr. Wylie, once you get past the outside of me." She stood up and smoothed her skirt. "Now, where would you like me to sleep?" He put her in the small room off the back hallway. It had been a storage room for most of the last 3 years. Before that, he didn't think about before that. He'd cleared the boxes into the barn that afternoon while she was washing the road dust off herself, and he dragged in the spare mattress from the attic and set up the old iron bed frame his mother had left him. It wasn't much. Clean sheets, a small dresser, one window that looked out over the east pasture. She stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment. "It's fine," she said. "Thank you." "Supper's your responsibility starting tomorrow," he said. "Tonight I'll manage." "I can manage tonight as well." "You just traveled 3 days." "I'm not fragile." He looked at her. "I never said you were." "No," she said quietly, "but you're looking at me like I might be." He left her to settle in. Supper that night was quiet, in the way that only two strangers in a small house can make a room feel quiet. Like every silence has a shape and a sound all its own. She'd made a simple meal: beans, salt pork, cornbread. And she'd done it efficiently, without asking where anything was, because she'd apparently spent the afternoon memorizing the kitchen. He ate and she ate, and the only sounds were utensils and the occasional pop from the stove. Halfway through, he said, "The agency letter said your name was Clara." She looked up. "Did it?" "Was that a mistake on their part or yours?" She set down her fork. For the first time, something in her composure showed its seams. "It was an arrangement," she said. "The woman originally corresponding with you, a woman named Clara Finch. She had a change of circumstances. She withdrew from the agency. I was brought in to take her place." Without telling me. Without telling you. Why? Because the agency believed the match was still a sound one, and because... She stopped, looked at the table, then looked back up at him, and there was something in her eyes now that hadn't been there before. Not fear, exactly. Something that lived right next to it. Because I needed to go somewhere, Mr. Wylie. Quickly. And this was the fastest, legitimate option I had. Legitimate, he repeated. Yes. You're running from something. She held his gaze, didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. I'm going to ask you one more time, he said quietly, and I'd appreciate the truth, not a careful version of it. Are you in trouble? A long beat passed between them. Not yet, she said. He lay awake that night for a long time. The house was quiet in the way it always was. The deep, empty quiet of a place that had once held more life than it did now. He'd gotten used to it over the past 3 years. Mostly. Some nights it pressed down on him harder than others. Tonight he could hear her moving in the back room. Small sounds, a floorboard, the scrape of the dresser drawer. Then stillness. He thought about the letter he'd burned that morning, about the words he'd written to the agency 9 weeks ago, sitting at this same table, in this same quiet house, thinking he could solve the problem of loneliness the way he solved every other problem. Practically, methodically, without asking too much from himself or anyone else. Plain, practical, quiet. That was what he'd written. He hadn't written it because he didn't appreciate beauty. He'd written it because he knew what beauty did to him. He'd married a beautiful woman once. He'd loved her in a way that had reorganized every part of him, had made him into a different man entirely. The kind of man who could be soft and frightened and completely undone by a single look across a room. And then she had died. And it had taken 3 years just to get back to something that resembled functioning. 3 years to build walls high enough and thick enough that a man could wake up every morning and just work. Just live. Without the weight of it crushing him flat. He didn't need that again. He didn't want it. He had asked for plain and practical because he needed a partner, not a person who could reach inside him and take hold of something. And then Lillian Hawke had stepped off that wagon. He rolled over and stared at the ceiling. Not yet, she'd said. He was a practical man. He knew what that meant. It meant trouble was coming. It meant whatever she was running from had legs and a direction, and sooner or later it was going to find its way to this stretch of land and this quiet house, and this new, careful life he'd spent 3 years building from rubble. The smart thing, the obvious thing, was to put her back on the next stage heading east and write a sharp letter to the Whitmore agency about honesty in business dealings. He knew that. He understood it completely. He also knew he wasn't going to do it. He wasn't entirely sure why. He told himself it was practical. A ranch this size needed 2 people to run it properly, and the summer crops weren't going to manage themselves. He told himself it was the decent Christian thing, turning a woman out into the road at dark. He told himself a lot of things. He went to sleep listening to the wind move through the pasture grass, and he didn't believe a single one of them. She was up before him. He came into the kitchen just after first light and found her at the stove, with her hair still loose, wearing a plain work dress she must have changed into sometime in the night. Coffee was already made. Eggs were in the pan. She had her back to him, and she was humming something soft under her breath. Something he didn't recognize. And for one strange second, the kitchen felt like a different room entirely. Warmer, fuller, more lived in. And then he stepped through the doorway, and she heard him, and the humming stopped. "Morning," she said, without turning around. Morning. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watched her work. She moved with an efficiency that was almost unsettling. Not performative, not nervous, just competent in a way that seemed deeply practiced. "You've run a household before," he said. "Yes." "A large one." She hesitated just a fraction. "A moderately sized one." He let it go. For now. They ate breakfast with more ease than the night before. Not comfortable exactly, but less brittle. The sun came through the east window and landed on the table between them, and neither of them said much. But the silence had changed its shape overnight. It felt less like a warning and more like a negotiation. After a while, she said, "What needs doing today?" "Fence repair on the north pasture. Barn needs mucking. I've got a delivery coming from the feed store mid-morning." "I can handle the barn." He looked at her. "I told you I'm not fragile," she said evenly. "Mucking a barn's hard work. I'm aware of what it involves." He studied her face for a moment. That same careful steadiness. That same hold it together from the inside composure. He wondered how long she'd been wearing it, whether she even knew how to take it off. "Fine," he said. "There's a pair of old boots in the back hallway. Should fit close enough." She nodded. "And, Miss Hawke?" She looked up. "Whatever you're not telling me," he said, "I'm not asking again today, but I will ask. And when I do, I'd appreciate the truth, the whole of it, not the safe version." She held his gaze for a long moment. "When you ask," she said, "I'll tell you what I can." "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not." She carried her plate to the wash basin and went to find the boots. He watched her walk to the barn from the north fence line, a shovel over one shoulder, her hair pinned back tight again, those old, too big boots on her feet. She walked like a woman who had decided something and wasn't inclined to revisit the decision. He drove a fence post with more force than it needed. Somewhere west of here, back in whatever she was running from, something was coming this way. He could feel it the way you could feel weather before it showed itself in the sky. A low pressure in the air, a particular quality of silence. He drove another post. He was 51 years old. He had buried a wife and survived a drought and renegotiated a bank loan in the worst year of his life without help from a single soul. He had built this ranch from a debt-ridden 40 acres into something that ran clean and straight and kept him alive and solvent. He was not a man who made space for complications. And yet... He looked back toward the barn. He could hear her in there now, the rhythmic scrape of a shovel against packed earth, steady and unhurried, like a woman who had learned to do hard things without complaint. He turned back to the fence. "Not yet," she had said, but something was coming. He knew it the way he knew weather, the way he knew drought, the way he knew everything that had ever cost him more than he thought he could pay. He gripped the post driver, and he got back to work. The feed delivery came late. Jackson had been watching the road since mid-morning, and when the wagon finally rolled in just past noon, the driver, a young man named Dale Pritchett, barely 20, who worked for Haskell Supply, climbed down and started unloading sacks with the cheerful efficiency of someone who hadn't yet learned that hard work was supposed to feel like punishment. He stopped when he saw Lily come out of the barn. He didn't say anything. He just stopped, sack in both arms, mouth slightly open, eyes doing what young men's eyes did when they forgot themselves. Jackson stepped between them without thinking about it. "Dale," the boy snapped back. "Yes, sir, Mr. Wylie. Sorry, sir." He hauled the sack toward the storage shed and kept his eyes down for the rest of the unloading. Lily wiped her hands on the front of her work apron and came to stand beside Jackson. She smelled like straw and honest effort. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Step in front of me like I needed protecting from a 20-year-old boy." Jackson signed Dale's delivery slip without looking at her. "I wasn't protecting you. I was reminding him he was on the clock." She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a dismissal. "Of course you were." Dale finished up quickly, took his slip, and climbed back on the wagon. He was halfway down the road before he let himself look back. Jackson saw it. He didn't say a word.
"You do that often?" Lily asked.
"Do what?" "Stand between things and other things?" He finally looked at her. Her face was dusty. There was a streak of something, barn muck, most likely, along her left forearm, and she hadn't bothered to wipe it off. She looked tired, in the way that meant she'd worked hard, not in the way that meant she was fragile. Her eyes were steady on his, and they were asking him something he didn't quite know how to answer. "I run a ranch," he said. "It's what I do." He walked toward the storage shed to check the delivery count. That afternoon, he caught her in the back hallway. She was standing in front of the door at the end of it, the one that stayed locked, and she wasn't touching it or trying the handle. She was just standing there, one hand resting lightly on the wall beside it, her head tilted slightly, like she was listening. "That room's not in use," he said from behind her. She turned, unhurried, without any guilt. "I noticed. Then there's nothing for you in that direction." She looked at him for a moment. "There's a draft coming from under the door. If the window's been left open in there, you'll have weather damage before the season's out." He didn't say anything. "I'm not trying to pry, Mr. Wylie," she said, her voice gentle but direct. "I'm telling you about your house." "I'll see to it." She nodded once and moved past him down the hall without another word. He stood in front of that door for a long time after she left, long enough that the afternoon light shifted and the hallway went dim around him. He didn't open it. He never opened it. By the end of the first week, they had settled into something that worked. Not warmth exactly, not comfort, but a kind of functional rhythm that kept the ranch running and kept them both from spending too much time in each other's heads. She cooked. He fixed. She kept the ledgers with a precision that told him, again, that she'd managed money before. He cut wood. She preserved the early summer vegetables. They ate together in the evenings because the house only had one table, and they talked about the ranch because that was a safe subject. And they did not talk about Pennsylvania or locked rooms or the question she hadn't fully answered. It was working. And then his neighbor came to call. Walter Grimes owned the property that abutted Jackson's on the east side, 400 acres of overgrazed pasture and a disposition to match. He was the kind of man who had opinions about everything that wasn't his business, and the confidence of someone who had never once been told to sit down and be quiet. He arrived on a Thursday, uninvited, riding the big gray horse he used when he wanted to make an impression. Jackson was at the well when he heard the hooves. He turned and waited, wiping his hands, already feeling the particular kind of tired that Walter Grimes inspired in him. "Jackson!" Walter swung down. He was already looking past Jackson toward the house. "Walter." "Heard you got yourself a woman." "Heard from who?" Walter shrugged. "Word travels. She pretty?" "She's my housekeeper," Jackson said, "and she's none of your business." Walter grinned. He had the kind of grin that made you want to check your pockets. "Now that ain't very neighborly. I just came to say hello. Maybe meet the lady." "She's busy." "Doing what?" "Working, which is what people do on a ranch." Walter tilted his head, still grinning. "You always were a private man, Jackson. Admired that about you." Still, he glanced at the house again. A man out here alone, too long. He gets strange ideas about what's normal. Be good for you to have some softness around the place." Jackson took a step toward him. Not threatening, just close enough. "She's here to help run the ranch," he said, his voice very level. "There's nothing else to discuss. I'd appreciate you heading back to your property, Walter." The grin faded a notch. Walter held his gaze for a beat, just long enough to make a point about the kind of man he was. And then he turned and remounted. "Fine, fine. Just being friendly." He gathered his reins. "Tell her Walter Grimes said, 'Welcome to the county.'" He rode off. Jackson stood at the well and breathed through his nose until the gray horse was a small shape on the road and the sound of hooves had gone. Then he turned and found Lily standing at the kitchen window. She'd seen the whole thing. He walked back to the house. "He a regular problem?" she asked when he came in. "He's a regular nuisance. Different thing." He went to the wash basin and scrubbed his hands harder than they needed. "He's mostly harmless. Mostly." "You stepped in front of me again," she said. "Only this time I wasn't even there." He turned around. She was watching him with that careful, measuring look she got sometimes, like she was adding numbers in her head that nobody had asked her to add. "He didn't need to meet you," Jackson said simply. "Why not?" "Because men like Walter Grimes file information away and use it later. And I don't know enough about your situation yet to know what information is safe for him to have." She went very still. Something shifted in her face. Not fear, not gratitude exactly. Something in between those two things. Something that looked like the moment a person realizes they've been carrying a weight alone for so long they forgot what it felt like to have someone notice it. "Jackson," she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name. He waited. "I need to tell you something," she said. They sat at the kitchen table. She had her hands folded on the surface in front of her, the same way she'd sat the first night. But the composure was different now, thinner, like cloth that had been worn too many times. "My name is Lillian Hawke," she started. "That part is true. I grew up in Philadelphia. My father is Cornelius Hawke." She paused. "If you've read any Eastern financial papers in the last decade, you may know that name." He didn't follow Eastern financial papers. He told her so. "He's a wealthy man," she said. "A very wealthy man, with a great many business arrangements that depend on—" she chose her word carefully, "on alliances. And one of those alliances required a bride." The kitchen was very quiet. "He arranged a marriage," Jackson said. "He arranged a contract." Her voice was flat. "With a man named Preston Aldrich, from Boston, 53 years old, twice widowed." She paused. "Both previous wives died of what were ruled natural causes within 2 years of the wedding." Jackson's hands went flat on the table. "I refused," she said. "My father informed me that refusing was not an option available to me. The contract had already been signed. Money had changed hands." A muscle moved in her jaw. "I had 2 weeks before the wedding date, so I left." "How?" "The woman I corresponded with at the Whitmore agency, Clara Finch, she was a friend. We grew up together. She helped me disappear." Lily looked at the table for a moment. "She gave me her correspondence with you. Told me there was a rancher in New Mexico who wanted a practical woman and wasn't likely to ask too many questions." He let that land. "You came out here to hide," he said. "I came out here to survive," she corrected quietly. "There's a difference." "And your father?" "He has resources. He's been looking." She met his eyes. "I've been careful. But careful only lasts so long, Mr. Wylie. I know that. I knew it when I came." He stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his back to her and both hands braced on the counter, staring out at the land. "So there's a wealthy man back east," he said, "with a business arrangement that needs a bride, and a father who signed a contract." He turned around. "And both of them are going to come looking." "Eventually," she said. "Yes." "And you decided to land that on my doorstep." She held his gaze. "I didn't have another door." The silence stretched between them, long and uncomfortable, and honest. "Aldrich," he said, "the man in Boston, 2 dead wives." "Yes." "And your father knew." Something crossed her face, fast and raw and terrible. "He knew." Jackson pulled out his chair and sat back down. He looked at her for a long moment, at her steady hands and her careful composure, and the thing behind her eyes that had been there since the first day, and that he now understood was not just pride. It was terror. Well-dressed, long-practiced terror. "All right," he said. She blinked. "All right?" "You needed a door. This one's open." He leaned forward. "But I need everything, Miss Hawke, not the careful version. If trouble's coming to this property, I need to know its shape and its speed. Everything you know about Aldrich and your father and anyone else who might be following that trail." She stared at him. "You're not sending me back," she said slowly. "I said the door was open." "Why?" The word came out stripped bare, without any of the composure around it. Just the raw, confused core of it. "You don't know me. This isn't your problem. You could put me on the next stage and write a letter and be done with the whole business." "I could," he agreed. "Then why won't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because 2 wives died," he said finally, "and their husbands didn't protect them." He met her eyes. "I'm not that kind of man." She told him everything. It took most of the evening. The coffee went cold, and he didn't move to reheat it. She talked, and he listened. And what came out of her over the next 2 hours was not just a story about a father and a contract and a man in Boston with dead wives. It was the story of a woman who had spent her entire life being managed. Her education managed. Her social circle managed. Her future managed. And who had run not just from a marriage, but from 28 years of being treated like a line item in someone else's ledger. She told him about the night she'd overheard her father talking to Aldrich in his study, about the particular way men talked when they thought no women were listening, blunt and clinical and ugly. She told him about Clara's plan, about the 3 days in a rooming house in Pittsburgh waiting for the stage, about the woman she'd paid to travel east on a different stage under her name, to buy herself time. She told him she'd been careful. She told him she'd been so careful. And then she told him about the man she'd seen at the last stage stop before here, a thin man in a gray coat who had looked at her in a way that wasn't coincidence. Jackson went still. "Say that again?" "2 stops back. A man in a gray coat. He looked at me. Not the way men look when they notice a woman. The way men look when they're confirming something." "Did he board the stage?" "No, he stayed at the stop." She looked at her hands. "But he had a horse." Jackson stood up. "Why didn't you tell me this when you arrived?" "Because I wasn't certain." Her voice was tight. "I'm still not certain." "But you believe it?" She looked up at him. "Yes, I believe it." He was already moving to the window. He stood to the side of it, not in front, the habit of a careful man, and looked at the road. Nothing. Just the dark and the summer night and the sound of the wind. "How long ago?" he said. "The last stop. How long?" 4 days. 4 days. A man on a good horse could cover that distance in 3. Did he see where you were headed? He turned back to her. The ticket agent called out the stops. Anyone in that room knew where the stage was going. Her voice was very controlled now, but her hands, flat on the table, were pressing down hard on the wood. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you... Stop apologizing. His voice came out sharper than he intended. He pulled it back. Stop. This isn't on you. He stood across the table from her and ran a hand over his face. I need to think. I understand if... I said, stop. He looked at her. You're not going anywhere tonight. We'll figure this out. She pressed her lips together and nodded, once, tight. He grabbed his hat off the hook by the door. Where are you going? She asked. I'm going to check the road in the south pasture, and then I'm going to come back in and make sure the locks are solid. He looked at her. Stay away from the windows. She stood up. Jackson. He stopped. I am sorry, she said again, softer this time. Not the composed, practiced kind of apology, the real kind, the kind that costs something. I came here because I had no other choice, but I knew I might be bringing this with me, and I should have told you sooner. He looked at her for a long moment. In the low lamplight, with the composure finally worn down to something more honest, she looked younger than he'd realized, and more frightened, and more determined, all at the same time. You told me when it counted, he said. He went out into the dark. He walked the perimeter for nearly an hour. South fence, north fence, the road in both directions as far as the dark let him see. The barn, both doors. The storage shed. The well. Nothing. No rider. No fresh tracks he didn't recognize. No thin man in a gray coat. But the night had weight to it tonight that it hadn't had before. And Jackson had lived long enough to know the difference between nothing being wrong and nothing being visible yet. He went back inside. She was still at the table. She'd reheated the coffee, and she pushed a cup toward him when he sat down. He wrapped both hands around it. Anything? She asked. Not tonight. She let out a breath that she'd been holding for a while. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we're going to talk about a few things. About the layout of this property, and where to be and where not to be. About what we tell people and what we don't. He looked at her. And I'm going to need a full description of that man in the gray coat, she nodded. And, Miss Hawke, she looked up. The arrangement stands, he said. Whatever comes. You're here as long as you need to be. Something broke open in her expression. Not dramatically. Not the kind of breaking that fell apart. The kind that opened. Like a window long painted shut, suddenly coming loose. Just for a second. Then she pulled it back together and nodded again and stood up with her cup. Good night, Mr. Wylie, she said. Jackson, he said. She paused in the doorway. You called me Jackson this afternoon, he said, before you told me the truth. I'd like it if you kept doing that. A beat passed, then, and it was small, and it was real, and it cost her something. She almost smiled. Good night, Jackson, she said. He sat at the table for a long time after her door closed. Outside, the summer dark pressed against the windows. Somewhere on the road to the east, maybe 3 days out, maybe less, something was moving in their direction. He was 51 years old. He had survived everything this land had thrown at him. He looked at the door at the end of the back hallway, and for the first time in 3 years he thought, it might be time to let some light in. He didn't sleep much. By the time the sky started going gray at the edges, Jackson had already been up for an hour, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a piece of paper where he'd written down everything Lily had told him the night before. Names, dates, the description of the man in the gray coat, thin, narrow face, light eyes, a way of standing still that didn't match the kind of stillness that came from ease, the kind that came from practice. He'd seen men like that before, not often, but enough to know what they were hired to do. He folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket when he heard her door open. She came into the kitchen already dressed, hair pinned back, moving with the same quiet efficiency she always did in the mornings. But her eyes, when they found his, held something different today. The composure was still there, but underneath it was something raw and watchful, the way a person looked the morning after they'd laid down a heavy truth and weren't sure yet whether it had been the right call. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Neither did you." She didn't argue that. She went to the stove and started the coffee, and kept her back to him just long enough to organize herself. Then she turned around. "Have you decided anything?" she asked. "I've decided a few things," he said. "Sit down." She sat. "I'm riding into Cutter's Creek this morning," he said. "There's a man there, Tom Briggs, runs the telegraph office and generally knows everything that moves through this county before it moves. If your father sent someone, there may already be inquiries, strangers asking about a woman traveling alone." She nodded slowly. "And if there are?" "Then we know how much time we have." He looked at her steady. "I'm also going to talk to a man named Ellis Ward. He's a lawyer, not a fancy one, but an honest one, which out here matters more. I want to understand what a contract like the one your father signed actually means in terms of legal reach, whether it crosses state lines, whether Aldrich has any legitimate claim." Something flickered behind her eyes. "You think he might come himself?" "I think a man who can afford to send someone ahead can afford to follow behind." He leaned forward. "I need you to stay on the property today. Don't go beyond the barn. If anyone comes to the door while I'm gone, anyone, you don't answer it. You go to the back hallway and you wait." "I'm not going to hide in the hallway like a frightened child," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to be smart." He held her gaze. "There's a difference." A beat. Then she let out a breath through her nose and gave him one short nod. "Fine." "There's a rifle above the back door," he said. "You know how to use one?" She met his eyes. "Yes." He didn't ask how. The answer told him enough. He rode out just after sunup. Cutter's Creek was 11 miles east, which meant just over an hour at a steady pace. He rode it, thinking about what he knew and what he didn't, and which of those categories was more dangerous. He'd known women in difficult situations before. The West was full of them. Women who'd come out here running from something and found that the something had long legs. He'd helped 2 different women in his years ranching, both neighbors, both situations that resolved quietly. He wasn't inexperienced in the general shape of trouble. But this was different, and he knew it was different, and he tried to be honest with himself about why. He pulled up at Tom Briggs's office just before 8 o'clock. Tom was already at his desk, which was typical. Tom was always at his desk. The man appeared to live there. "Jackson, don't usually see you in on a weekday." Tom leaned back in his chair and folded his hands over his substantial middle. "Something wrong?" "Maybe." Jackson sat down across from him and kept his voice low, because there were always ears near a telegraph office. "I need to know if anyone's been asking around. A woman, traveling alone, came through on the stage about 5 days ago, heading to the Wylie ranch." Tom's eyebrows went up just a fraction. "Heard you had someone out there now." "I do. I need to know if anyone else has been asking after her." Tom was quiet for a moment, in the considering way of a man who kept information the way other men kept money. "There was a fella," he said slowly. "Yesterday afternoon. Came in off the road, not the stage. Thin man, gray coat. Asked if I'd seen a woman come through, gave a description. Said he was a relative looking for a lost family member." Jackson's jaw tightened. "What did you tell him?" "Told him I minded telegraph traffic, not passenger traffic." Tom studied him. "Didn't seem satisfied. Went over to the hotel. Far as I know, he's still there." Still there, 1 mile from where Jackson was sitting. "He have a name?" "Gave one. Harlan Cross." Tom paused. "Didn't believe it was his real one." "No," Jackson agreed. "I don't suppose it was." He found Ellis Ward at his office above the dry goods store. Ellis was a compact, deliberate man in his mid-50s who had practiced law in 3 states before landing in Cutter's Creek and deciding he'd gone far enough. He listened to Jackson's account without interrupting, and with the focused stillness of a man who understood that the details people thought were small were usually the ones that mattered. When Jackson finished, Ellis was quiet for a moment. "A signed contract between 2 private parties for the purpose of marriage," he said finally. "Here's what that is in plain terms, Jackson. It's a civil matter, potentially enforceable in the state where it was written. But there are limits." He leaned forward. "A woman cannot be compelled to marry against her will. Not in any state I've practiced in. Not in any state I know of. What her father signed was binding on himself, not on her." "Then what's the legal risk?" "Breach of contract. The father owes Aldrich whatever consideration they agreed on if the marriage doesn't happen. That's between them." Ellis paused. "What the risk is, practically, is that a wealthy and motivated man with connections can make a woman's life very difficult through channels that aren't strictly legal, but aren't easy to stop either. Harassment, pressure, showing up. And if the woman is legally married to someone else," Jackson said, "before any of that can happen." Ellis looked at him for a long moment. "Then Aldrich's claim is moot. Completely." Jackson stood up. "Good to know." "Jackson," Ellis's voice stopped him at the door. "That's a significant step. For both parties. Make sure you're thinking clearly." "I'm always thinking clearly," Jackson said. He walked back out into the summer heat. He didn't go back the direct way. He went past the hotel first. Rode slow, not looking at it too directly, but looking at it enough. There was a gray coat hanging over the railing of the second-floor balcony. Airing out, the way a man aired a coat after hard travel. Harlan Cross was still in town. Which meant Cross hadn't confirmed Lily's location yet. Which meant they had a little time. Not much. Jackson turned his horse toward home and rode faster than he'd come. He found her in the kitchen, and for 1 sharp second when she heard the door and spun around with her hand going toward the counter, toward the bread knife, he realized, he understood all over again exactly how long she'd been living like this. "It's me," he said. She dropped her hand, breathed. "I heard hooves coming fast." "I was in a hurry." He hung up his hat. "He's in town. Harlan Cross. That's the name he gave Tom Briggs. He was asking about you yesterday." All the color left her face. Not dramatically, just quietly, like a lamp being turned down. "He hasn't confirmed your location yet," Jackson said quickly. "He's still at the hotel. We have time, but not much." He pulled out the kitchen chair and sat across from her. "I need to ask you something directly." She sat down. Her hands were very still on the table. "I talked to Ellis Ward this morning," he said, "about the legal situation, about your father's contract and what it means and what it doesn't mean. He looked at her straight. He told me that if you were already married, Aldrich's claim would be completely unenforceable. The contract would dissolve because what it was arranged to produce no longer existed. Lily stared at him. Jackson, I'm not asking for anything beyond what the arrangement already is, he said. I'm not asking for... He stopped, started again. This ranch needs 2 people to run it. You're already here. You've been running this kitchen better than it's been run in years, and your ledger work this week showed me 3 places where I was overpaying Haskell's by 20%. I need what you already are. What I'm saying is, making it legal protects you. Fully. In a way that nothing else out here can do as fast. Her lips had parted slightly. She looked at him like she was trying to find the angle, the calculation, the hidden motive, and couldn't locate it. You'd do that, she said slowly, to protect me. I'd do it because it makes sense, he said, and because 2 dead wives deserve better than to have a 3rd one standing in that man's path with nothing between them and him. Something broke in her then. Not the way it had the night before, not that careful, small opening. Something bigger. She pressed both hands over her mouth for just a moment, and her eyes went bright with something she was clearly not going to let fall. And then she pulled herself back with a visible effort and dropped her hands to the table. You don't know me, she said. Her voice was shaking slightly, just at the edges. We've known each other 9 days. I know enough. You know I brought trouble to your door. You brought honesty to my door, he said. Eventually. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. I'll settle for that. She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. He didn't push it, and he didn't soften it, and he didn't take it back. All right, she said at last. All right? Yes. She straightened in her chair. All right. They rode into Cutter's Creek together that afternoon. He'd thought about it carefully and decided that trying to slip into town quietly was the wrong move. Cross was already there. He already knew there was a woman at the Wylie ranch, or he was close to knowing it. Riding in like they had something to hide would confirm his suspicions faster than riding in like they had nothing to hide at all. So they rode in together. Lily in her better dress, the deep blue one she'd pressed that morning without being asked, and Jackson in his clean shirt and the good hat. They tied the horses in front of Ellis Ward's office and walked in like people who had somewhere to be and knew it. Ellis looked surprised. Then he looked at Jackson's face, and then he didn't look surprised anymore. You're serious, he said. I told you I was always thinking clearly. Ellis looked at Lily. Miss Hawke, is this of your own free will? It is, she said. Her voice was clear and even, no shake in it at all. And you understand the legal nature of what you're entering into? I understand it very well, Mr. Ward. Ellis studied her for another moment, then nodded once and reached for the right paperwork. It took 40 minutes. It was quiet and without ceremony and entirely legal. And when it was done, Ellis shook both their hands, and they walked back out into the summer afternoon as Mr. and Mrs. Jackson Wylie. She exhaled when they reached the boardwalk, long and slow, like something had been pressing on her chest for months and had finally moved aside. How do you feel? Jackson asked. Lighter, she said quietly, which is strange given the circumstances. He looked down the street toward the hotel without turning his head. The gray coat was gone from the railing. We should get back, he said. Cross found them on the road home. He came out of a stand of cottonwoods about 2 miles from the ranch, riding a bay horse at a walk, casual as a man out for an afternoon ride. Except his eyes were not casual. They were quick and flat, moving from Jackson to Lily and back again, with the practiced efficiency of someone doing arithmetic. Jackson put himself between Cross and Lily without appearing to do it. Afternoon, Cross said. Afternoon, Jackson said. Nice day for a ride. Cross let his horse fall in alongside them at a matching pace. His accent was Eastern, clipped. The gray coat, close up, was expensive wool despite the dust. You folks live out this way? We do, Jackson said. Wylie Ranch. Cross's eyes moved to Lily. Ma'am, don't believe I've had the pleasure. Harlan Cross. Lily looked at him with an expression that revealed absolutely nothing. Mrs. Wylie, she said. Something flickered in Cross's face. So fast, most people would have missed it.
Jackson didn't miss it. Is that right? Cross said. Married this afternoon, Jackson said pleasantly.
Beautiful day for it. A beat. Cross was recalculating. Jackson could see it, the same way you could see a man's hand go still when the cards on the table weren't the cards he'd planned for. Congratulations, Cross said finally. Forgive me for asking. Your wife, is she from around here? She looks familiar to me. My wife is from right here, Jackson said. His voice was level and easy, and did not leave any room in it at all. Born and raised. She ain't been much farther than Cutter's Creek. You've probably got her confused with someone else, Mr. Cross. Cross looked at Lily one more time. She met his gaze and did not blink. Yes, Cross said slowly. I suppose I do. He touched the brim of his hat. Enjoy the evening, folks. He turned his horse off the road and rode in the other direction. Jackson did not watch him go. He kept his eyes forward and kept the horses moving at the same steady pace and said nothing until the sound of Cross's hoofbeats had gone completely. He believed you? Lily said. Her voice was tight. No, Jackson said quietly. He didn't. But it doesn't matter whether he believed me. He glanced at her. What matters is what he can do with what he knows now. And what he knows now is that you're a married woman with a legal name and a property and a husband who is looking him dead in the eye on a public road in broad daylight. She was quiet for a moment. So what does he do with that? He sends word to your father. Jackson kept his gaze forward. And your father sends word to Aldrich. And Aldrich has to decide whether to push a breach of contract against your father, which costs him money and reputation, or walk away from the whole business. And if he decides to push? Then it's a legal matter between two men in Boston, and you're a ranch wife in New Mexico who has nothing to do with it. She absorbed that. You make it sound simple, she said. It's not simple, he said, but it's survivable, which is more than it was this morning. They were nearly home when she said it. It came out quiet, no warning, just words dropped into the space between them like a stone into still water. The first night, she said, when you told me you weren't the kind of man who let women go unprotected. She paused. You were talking about your wife. He didn't answer right away. What was her name? She asked. Another pause, long enough that she clearly thought she'd crossed a line, and he could feel her pulling back. Margaret, he said. The word came out the way words came out when you hadn't said them in a long time. Rough at the edges, like something that had been still too long. Lily didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say anything. She just let the name sit there between them in the summer air, which was exactly the right thing to do, and he noticed that. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than any they'd had before. That night, after supper, while she was washing the dishes, he went down the back hallway. He stood in front of the locked door. He stood there for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and took out the key that had lived in his right front pocket for 3 years, that he had carried every day like a wound he couldn't close, and he put it in the lock. He didn't turn it, not yet, but he held it there. And in the kitchen, the quiet sound of Lily washing dishes moved through the house the way sound moved through a house that had someone in it. Real sound. Living sound. He heard her set a cup on the counter. He heard her hum, just a few notes, that song he still didn't recognize. He stood at the door with the key in the lock, and for the first time in 3 years, he thought that maybe, the weight on the other side of it wasn't something he had to carry alone anymore. He left the key in the lock when he walked away. He didn't take it with him. She found the key in the lock the next morning. She didn't touch it. She stood in the back hallway with a basket of lemons against her hip and looked at it for a long moment. The old brass key sitting in the old brass lock, exactly where someone had left it. And then she walked back to the kitchen and didn't say a word about it. Jackson came in from the barn an hour later, and she handed him coffee, and they talked about the north pasture fence and the possibility of rain by the weekend, and neither of them mentioned the key. But she watched his face when he sat down, the tightness around his eyes, the way he wrapped both hands around the cup like a man who needed something to hold. She'd been watching his face for 2 weeks now, and she'd gotten good at reading the language of it. What the set of his jaw meant, what it meant when his shoulders dropped a fraction, what it meant when he went still in the particular way he went still when something had gotten through the walls. The key had cost him something. She knew that without being told. She refilled his coffee and let it be. Cross was gone from the hotel by the following morning. Tom Briggs sent word by way of a passing ranch hand. The thin man had checked out before dawn, paid his bill in cash, and ridden east without stopping to talk to anyone. Jackson read the note at the breakfast table and didn't say anything for a full minute. "He's reporting back," Lily said. "That's what it means." "How long before my father responds?" "Depends on how fast Cross rides and how fast your father makes decisions." Jackson folded the note and set it down. "A week, maybe less." She looked at her hands. "And what form does the response take?" "That," he said, "is what I can't predict." He looked at her directly. "Your father is a businessman. When a business situation changes shape, a businessman recalculates. He's going to find out you're legally married, and that the contract with Aldrich is broken, and that he owes Aldrich a significant sum of money. He'll be angry. The question is whether angry makes him push harder or cut his losses." "You don't know my father," she said quietly. Something in her tone made him set down his cup. "Tell me," he said. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, it was carefully, the way you spoke about something you'd spent a long time learning not to say out loud. "Cornelius Hawke does not cut his losses," she said. "He doesn't understand the concept. When he loses something, he doesn't walk away. He finds a way to make the other person pay more than the loss was worth." She looked up. "He'll come. Maybe not himself, maybe not right away, but he'll come. Or he'll send someone with more authority than Harlan Cross. And it won't be to talk." The kitchen was quiet. "Then we prepare," Jackson said. "For what exactly?" "For whatever shape it takes." He stood up. "I'm going back to Ellis Ward today. I want the marriage filed in the county record and copies in 2 separate places. I want it bulletproof." "You think that matters to my father?" "It doesn't matter to your father. It matters to every judge and sheriff and court in the territory." He picked up his hat. "Your father has money. I have paper and a legal signature and a property in my name. Out here, that's not nothing." He came back from Cutter's Creek with the filed documents and something else. A look on his face she didn't recognize. Not worry exactly. Something older than worry. The look of a man who'd gotten news that confirmed what he already suspected, and still didn't like hearing it. She waited until he sat down. "Tom Briggs told me something else," he said. "Before Cross left, He was asking about me. Specifically. He looked at her. About the ranch's finances. Whether I was current on the banknote. Whether I'd had a good season. She stared at him. He was looking for leverage. He was doing a survey. Jackson's jaw tightened. Your father didn't just send someone to find you, Lily. He sent someone to assess the situation, to find out whether the man you'd attached yourself to was solid, or whether he had pressure points. And do you? She asked carefully. Have pressure points? He was quiet for a beat. Every man does. The question is whether yours are visible to people looking for them. Are they? He met her eyes. The banknote on this ranch has been paid on time for 11 years. The land is clear. I don't owe anyone in Cutter's Creek more than a meal or a handshake. He paused. But I'm one man on 400 acres, and that's a limitation a determined person could use if they came at it the right way. She pushed back from the table and stood up and walked to the window. She stood there with her back to him, and he could see the tension in her shoulders, the particular set of them that meant she was fighting something down. I keep doing this to you, she said. Doing what? Making your life into a problem to be solved. Her voice was tight. You had a quiet ranch and a quiet life and a manageable grief, and I walked in off a wagon and turned it into... She stopped, made herself stop. He stood up. Lily. His voice was not unkind. Turn around. She turned around. Her eyes were dry, which he suspected cost her something. You didn't create Cornelius Hawke, he said. You didn't create Preston Aldrich. You didn't create a world where a man could sign his daughter's life away for a business advantage. He held her gaze. You survived it. That's different. She pressed her lips together, held on. This is my ranch, he said. My land. My name on that marriage certificate. Anybody who wants to come at you has to come through that first. He let it settle. I don't need you to apologize for existing, Mrs. Wylie. The name landed differently than she expected. She'd been Mrs. Wylie for 4 days, and every time she heard it, something shifted slightly in her chest, like furniture being moved into a position that made more sense. You're a stubborn man, she said. 11 years of mortgage payments, he agreed. It tends to produce that. For the first time in days, she laughed. A real one. Short and surprised and entirely unguarded. And when it came out, she looked almost startled by it herself. He didn't say anything. But somewhere behind the walls, something eased. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It came with the regular post, no special delivery, addressed in a hand so controlled it barely looked human. Cornelius Hawke's penmanship, Lily told him, had been trained by a private tutor in Boston at considerable expense. And it showed. Every letter perfectly formed, every word placed like a chess piece. Jackson read it at the table while she stood behind him, and she knew from the way his posture changed halfway through that it was worse than they'd hoped. He set it down and didn't speak for a moment. Read it, he said. She came around and read it standing up. It was short, 4 paragraphs, cold and precise and devastating in the specific way that only very controlled anger could be devastating. Cornelius Hawke did not dispute the marriage. He acknowledged it in the second sentence with the clinical brevity of a man acknowledging a bill of sale. What he disputed, in the 3 paragraphs that followed, was the legitimacy of Lily's departure. He used the word theft. He used the phrase property taken without consent. He cited a list of items, jewelry, documents, funds from a household account, that Lily had taken when she left. And in the final paragraph, He informed them that his legal representative would be arriving at Wylie Ranch within 10 days to discuss the matter, and that if the items were not returned, he would be pursuing the matter through the courts with the full weight of his financial resources behind him. Lily set the letter down. Her face was white. "The jewelry was mine," she said. Her voice was barely controlled. "My mother's, left to me in her will. He never had any legal claim to it." She stopped. "The documents, those were my own papers. Birth record, my mother's death certificate." She stopped again, hard. "The funds. There was money in a household account that I managed. I took 3 months' operating funds, which was less than he owed me in 5 years of managing his household without wages." "I believe you," Jackson said immediately. She looked at him. "I believe every word of it," he said. "But what I believe, and what a court in Philadelphia will take 2 years and considerable money to decide, are 2 different things." He stood up. "This is the lover he found. He can't force you back. He can't break the marriage. So he's going to make the cost of staying so high that he calculates we'll fold." "Will we?" she asked. Direct, unblinking. He looked at her for a long moment. "What do you want, Lily?" She blinked, like nobody had asked her that question in a very long time. "I want to stay," she said. Simple and plain, and stripped of everything but the truth. "I want this to be over, and I want to stay." He nodded once. "Then we fight it," he said, "on our terms, on our ground." He rode back into Cutter's Creek the next morning with the letter and a set of questions he'd written out the night before, and he was in Ellis Ward's office before 9. Ellis read the letter twice. His expression didn't change much, but his mouth went thin. "He's claiming conversion of property," Ellis said. "In plain terms, he's saying she stole from him. She took her own mother's jewelry and her own personal documents. Does she have the will? The one that left the jewelry to her specifically?" Jackson stopped. "I don't know." "That's the first thing." Ellis set the letter down. "If she has documentation of the bequest, the jewelry claim dissolves. Courts don't love a man who tries to reclaim property that a will already dispensed." He tapped the letter. "The document claim, birth record, death certificate, those are personal documents, and there's no court in the country that's going to call a woman a thief for taking her own birth record." He paused. "The funds are the murkiest. How much are we talking?" She said 3 months operating funds. Ellis made a note. "That's arguable either way. But here's what matters most, Jackson. He said his legal representative will be here within 10 days. That means this is still a negotiation. If he'd already decided to pursue it through courts, he'd have filed, not written a letter." He looked up. "He's testing you, seeing if you blink." "I'm not blinking." "Then respond in kind. Send a letter through me, official letterhead, which carries weight. Acknowledge receipt of the letter. State that Mrs. Wylie is prepared to establish legal ownership of each item in question through documented evidence, and invite his representative to make the journey." Ellis allowed a small, dry smile. "And charge him the inconvenience of traveling to New Mexico to have an argument he's going to lose." Jackson almost smiled back. "Write it." He came home at noon to find Walter Grimes's horse tied at the post. His hand went still on his own horse's reins. He came in through the front door without rushing and found Walter in the kitchen, standing, hat in hand, with the particular look of a man who'd been charming a woman and wasn't entirely sure it was working. Lily was at the counter with a dish towel in her hands, and the expression of someone who was being patient as a deliberate strategy. "Jackson!" Walter turned, all wide smile and big gesture. Congratulations, I hear. Married woman now. I ran into Dale Pritchett at the feed store, and he told me. Didn't believe it at first, I'll tell you. Walter. Jackson came into the kitchen and stood beside Lily without making a production of it. What brings you out today? Just being neighborly. Wanted to offer my congratulations in person. He looked between them. Quite a surprise. You always were a private man, Jackson, but even I didn't see this coming. He chuckled.
His eyes, though, were doing that filing thing again, moving, calculating, storing.
We appreciate the good wishes, Lily said. Her voice was warm and perfectly measured. It was sudden, I know. When something is right, there's no sense waiting. Walter looked at her with something that was almost respect. Almost. Well said, Mrs. Wylie. He turned his hat in his hands. I did also have a small business matter. Was going to talk to you about it anyway, Jackson. And since I was passing... He shrugged with a casualness that wasn't casual at all. Man came through my property yesterday. East side fence line, near the cottonwoods. Asking about this ranch. About you, specifically. Jackson went still. What kind of man? He said. City type. Good suit, bad boots. The kind of man who rode out here from somewhere with money and doesn't know what the land does to shoes. Walter watched him. He asked whether you were the kind of man who kept to himself or the kind who had friends, whether you had any dealings with the county sheriff, whether you were well regarded in town. He paused. I told him you were the most boring man in the county and that if he had business with you, he should ride up to your door like a Christian. Did he give a name? Gave one. Fletcher, he said. James Fletcher. Not Cross. A different man. Jackson felt the shift happen. The same low-pressure feeling he'd had the morning Lily arrived. But colder now. More specific. Harlan Cross had been a surveyor. Fletcher was something else. Thank you, Walter, he said. Something in Jackson's tone must have given it away, because Walter's expression changed. The cheerful nosiness dropped back, and underneath it was the thing that most people didn't realize Walter Grimes had. A solid, practical instinct for when a situation was real. You in trouble, Jackson? He asked quietly. Not yet. Walter nodded slowly. He looked at Lily. Something passed across his face. Not the oily interest from before, but something more straightforward. You got good boots in your barn, he said. Old pair, left side, hanging on the peg. They're for when the ground's wet. He looked back at Jackson. My boys and I are home most evenings if you need something. He put his hat on, nodded once, and let himself out. The kitchen was very quiet. Lily set down the dish towel. Fletcher, she said, not Cross. No. She turned to face him. Fletcher is my father's personal solicitor. He's been with him for 20 years. Her voice had gone flat in a way that meant the fear was very close to the surface, and she was holding it down with both hands. He doesn't send Fletcher for negotiations, Jackson. He sends Fletcher when negotiations are over. The thing Jackson had been waiting for, the shoe he'd known was going to drop since the morning he picked up her trunk from the road, hit the floor. How far out? He said. He was at Walter's yesterday. He's close. He might be watching the property right now. Jackson crossed to the back door. He stood to the side of it, not in front of it, and looked out through the window. Nothing visible. But that meant less than it used to. Lily, he said. The will. Your mother's will. Do you have a copy with you? She was already moving. She went to the back room, and he heard the drawer pull and the particular sound of papers being moved quickly, and she came back 30 seconds later with a folded document that had been folded and refolded so many times it had worn soft at the creases. I've carried it since the day she died, she said. He took it, unfolded it carefully, read enough to confirm what he needed. "This is clear," he said. "The jewelry is yours, named specifically, witnessed and filed." He looked up. "Ellis needs this today." "I'll ride with you." "No," he shook his head.
"If Fletcher is watching this property, we both leave and we hand him an empty house. I need you here." He looked at her. "Loaded rifle, back hallway. Don't open the door to anyone whose name you don't know." "I won't hide." "I know you won't hide." He met her eyes. "I need you to hold the ground. That's different." She held his gaze, searching it. Then she took the rifle from above the back door and checked the load with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it before. And she looked back at him. "Go," she said. "Fast." He was halfway to the road when he heard the second horse. Not behind him. Ahead. Someone coming from the east, the direction of town, at a pace that was steady but not hurried. The pace of a man who knew where he was going and wasn't in any particular rush, because he believed he had the advantage. Jackson pulled his horse to a stop and waited. The man who came around the bend was exactly what Lily had described without knowing she'd described him. City suit, good quality. Bad boots already showing red dust. A soft face that had been comfortable for too long, but had hard eyes that hadn't softened at all. He stopped when he saw Jackson. "Mr. Wylie," he said. Confirmation, not question. He already knew. "That's right." "James Fletcher. I represent Cornelius Hawke of Philadelphia. I believe you received his letter." "I believe you already know we did." Fletcher studied him the way a man studied a document, for errors, for exploitable language, for weakness. "Then you know the purpose of my visit." "I know the purpose your employer told you." Jackson kept his horse still. "I know a few other things as well. I know that the items named in that letter are legally the property of my wife, and I have documentation to that effect. And I have a lawyer in Cutter's Creek who will be very happy to discuss that with your employer's counsel, for as long as it takes." He paused. "I also know that you've been on my neighbor's property asking questions about me, which, depending on how you want to look at it, could constitute a few different things that my lawyer would also be happy to discuss." Fletcher's face had not moved, but his hands had tightened slightly on his reins. "Mr. Wylie," he said carefully, "my client has significant resources and a long memory. You may win a preliminary argument about the property in question. You will not enjoy the process that follows." "Mr. Fletcher," Jackson said, "I have been on this land for 22 years. I have weathered drought and debt and loss and every difficulty this territory knows how to produce. I am not a man who frightens easily, and I am not a man who can be outlasted." He let that land. "You are welcome to stay in Cutter's Creek as long as your client is paying your expenses and discuss this matter with my lawyer. Those are the terms available to you today." A long silence on the road between them. The summer heat pressed down without mercy. Fletcher looked at him for a long, calculating moment. Then he looked past Jackson at the ranch house, and Jackson knew precisely, that he was thinking about Lillian there, about the girl he'd watched grow up maybe, about the daughter of the man who paid his wages. "She is well?" he said. And for just 1 second, just barely, the professional mask slipped. It was unexpected enough that Jackson paused. "She is well," he said. "She is safe. She is home." Fletcher looked at him for another moment. "I'll be at the hotel," he said finally. "Tell your lawyer I'll meet him tomorrow at 10. He turned his horse and rode back toward town. Jackson sat on his horse in the road for a moment after Fletcher disappeared around the bend. Then he turned back toward the house. She was at the door before he reached the porch, rifle in hand, not raised, but present.
Her eyes went over him quickly, checking, the way people checked when they've been waiting in a bad kind of stillness. And then she exhaled. "Fletcher?" she said. "Fletcher." He climbed down. "He'll meet Ellis tomorrow morning." He looked up at her. "It's going to be all right, Lily." She looked at him for a moment. Her expression was layered, relief and doubt, and something deeper underneath both of them. Something she hadn't said yet and wasn't sure how to. "You told him I was home," she said. He met her eyes. "I did." "Did you mean it?" The question was quiet and direct, and it had nothing performative about it. It was the question of a woman who had been moved around like a piece on other people's boards for most of her life, and was asking, for possibly the first time, whether a place was actually hers. He looked at her standing in the doorway of his house with a rifle in her hand and her hair coming loose in the afternoon wind, and the look of a woman who had run a very long way and was tired and hopeful and afraid, and fighting all three at once. "I meant it," he said. She nodded, once, pulled herself together in that way she had. "Come inside," she said. "Supper's almost ready." He went inside, and in the back hallway the key was still in the lock. Ellis Ward met James Fletcher at 10 o'clock the next morning, and Jackson sat in the chair against the wall and didn't say a word for the first 40 minutes, because Ellis had told him not to, and Ellis was right. Fletcher was good. Jackson had to give him that. He came in with a leather satchel and a calm that was professional and practiced, and he laid out Cornelius Hawke's position the way a surgeon laid out instruments, precisely, without emotion, in the order they do the most damage. The jewelry claim, the document claim, the household funds. 3 separate legal arguments, each one designed to cost time and money to fight, even if you won every single one. Ellis listened without blinking. He made small notes. He let Fletcher finish completely. Then he opened his own folder and placed Lily's mother's will on the table between them. Fletcher looked at it. "The jewelry is itemized in Section 4, Ellis said pleasantly, named specifically, witnessed by 2 parties and filed in the Philadelphia County Record in 1871. If your client wishes to challenge that bequest, he's welcome to do so in a Philadelphia court, where he will lose, at considerable cost to himself." He placed a second document beside the will. Mrs. Wylie's birth record and her mother's death certificate are personal legal documents. There is no court in this territory or any other that will define a woman's possession of her own birth record as theft. I'd be happy to write to 3 judges I know personally if your client needs clarification on that point. Fletcher's jaw had gone tight. "The household funds," he said, "are the murkiest portion of this conversation," Ellis agreed. "Which is why I'd invite your client to consider whether the cost of relitigating a domestic financial arrangement across 2,000 miles of geography is worth the amount in question." He folded his hands. "I've done the math, Mr. Fletcher. Mr. Hawke's legal fees alone, at the rates Philadelphia firms charge, will exceed what he's claiming within the first 6 months. That's before travel costs, before witness fees, before the simple reality that New Mexico Territory courts look very skeptically at Eastern interests attempting to strong-arm local landowners." Silence. Fletcher looked at his satchel. Then he looked at Jackson, who hadn't moved or spoken. "My client will not simply walk away," Fletcher said. But the edge in it was different now. It had the sound of a position being maintained rather than a position being pressed. "I'm not asking him to walk away," Ellis said. "I'm asking him to do arithmetic." He leaned forward slightly. "His daughter is legally married. That situation is not reversible. His contract with Aldrich is broken, which is a matter between himself and Aldrich, and has nothing to do with anyone in this room. The items he's claiming are either legally hers or not worth the fight. He paused. There is one path through this that doesn't cost everyone significantly, and it requires Mr. Hawke to make a decision about what he values more, his money or his anger. Fletcher was quiet for a long time. "I'll need to wire my client," he said finally. "Of course," Ellis said. "Tom Briggs runs an excellent telegraph office. I believe you know where it is." Jackson didn't speak until they were outside. "You were right not to talk," Ellis said, before Jackson could say anything. "Fletcher is the kind of man who uses what you give him. You gave him nothing. How do you think Hawke responds?" Ellis was quiet for a moment, considering it honestly. "I think he's a man who has never lost cleanly in his life, and this is going to feel like losing. But I also think he's a businessman, and businessmen eventually do arithmetic." He looked at Jackson. "What tips it is whether Aldrich pushes the breach of contract hard or lets it go. If Aldrich is already looking for another arrangement and doesn't want the attention of a public dispute, Hawke has no reason to keep spending money on a fight he can't win. And if Aldrich does push, then Hawke needs a villain, and the easiest villain available to him is the man who married his daughter without his blessing." Ellis looked at him steadily. "Which means this could still go sideways, Jackson."
I want you to understand that. I understand it. Good. Go home. Wait for the wire. He came home to find the back hallway door open. Not wide open, just ajar. A thin line of light coming from inside, falling across the hallway floor. He stood at the end of the hall and looked at it. Then he heard Lily's voice from inside. Soft, just talking, the way people talk to themselves when they thought nobody was listening. Not really words he could make out, just the sound of a human voice in a room that had been silent for 3 years. He walked to the doorway and stopped. She was standing at the window on the far side of the room. Her back was to him. She had both hands wrapped around something, he couldn't see what, and she was looking out at the east pasture, the way people looked at things when they weren't really seeing them, when they were somewhere else entirely. On the dresser beside her, she'd set a small vase of wildflowers, the yellow ones that grew along the fence line. He had no idea where she'd found a vase. "Lily," he said quietly. She turned. She looked at him, and then at the room around her, taking in that he was seeing her in it, and something moved across her face. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "The key was in the lock, and I thought I wasn't going to touch anything. I just—" "It's all right," he said. "I can go." "I said it's all right." He stepped into the room. It smelled the same. That was the thing about rooms you locked. They held their smell. A particular combination of cedar and old paper and something that was just hers, Margaret's. The specific scent of another person's life. He hadn't breathed it in 3 years. It hit him in the chest like a hand pressing flat against a bruise. He breathed through it. Lily was watching him with the careful, quiet attention she gave to things that mattered. Not asking anything, not filling the space with words, just present. He looked around the room. The quilt on the bed, folded exactly as he'd left it. The small writing desk in the corner, with a half-finished letter on it that he'd never been able to make himself move. The portrait on the wall, Margaret at 30, painted the year before she got sick, with her dark eyes and her particular expression that was almost a smile, but not quite. He looked at it for a long time. "She looks kind," Lily said softly. She was. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "She was the kindest person I ever knew. And the most stubborn." He stopped. "She would have had an opinion about all of this." "A good one or a bad one?" He considered. "She'd have told me I was being slow," he said. "She always told me I was slow, about things that mattered."
The corner of his mouth moved. She wasn't wrong. Lily looked at him. What things? Telling her I loved her the first time. It took me 6 months. He didn't look away from the portrait. She finally told me I had to say it, or she was going to Philadelphia to find a man who could. He paused. I said it that same evening. Lily made a small sound that was half laugh and half something more tender than that. She sounds like she would have managed just fine without you, she said. She would have managed better. There was grief in it, but also something else now, something warmer, the way old grief sometimes softened into something that felt almost like gratitude. She was the kind of woman who made everything she touched work better. This house, this land. He paused. Me. He finally looked away from the portrait and looked at Lily. I locked this room because I thought keeping it the same was keeping something, he said. 3 years I thought that. She waited. I was wrong, he said. She didn't need a locked room. She needed me to keep living. He looked around the room one more time. I think I knew that. I wasn't ready to act on it. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the vase from the dresser and held it out to him. I can put these somewhere else, she said, if it's too much. He looked at the wildflowers. Yellow, bright, alive, entirely out of place in this held, still room. He thought about what Margaret would have said about them. He was pretty sure she would have said they were perfect. Leave them, he said. He walked to the writing desk. He picked up the unfinished letter. He looked at it once. My dear Margaret, I don't know how to begin this. And then he folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. Not to throw away, but to keep differently than the way the locked room kept things. Ellis thinks we'll hear back from Fletcher by tomorrow, he said, possibly sooner. She accepted the change in subject with the grace she accepted most things. And you think Hawke will fold? I think there's a chance. He turned back to her. I also think you should be prepared for him not to. He's your father. You know him better than Ellis's arithmetic does. She looked at the wildflowers. What he did to me, she said slowly, he did because he genuinely does not believe I am a person in the way he is a person. I am an asset, a line in a ledger. She looked up. A man who thinks that way doesn't change because the arithmetic shifts. He changes because something makes him afraid. What makes Cornelius Hawke afraid? Exposure, she said without hesitating. He has a reputation in Philadelphia, in his business circles. He has cultivated a very particular image. Generous patriarch, devoted father, pillar of the community. She paused. He sold his daughter to a man who killed 2 wives. If that became known, publicly known, through the right channels, it would cost him more than any legal settlement. Jackson looked at her. You'd do that? I'd do whatever protects this. She held his gaze, steady and clear. This ranch, this life, what you've built. A beat. What we're building. The words landed quietly between them. What we're building. He heard them the way you heard something you hadn't known you needed to hear until the moment it arrived. Let's wait for the wire first, he said. The wire came the next morning. Not from Fletcher. From Cornelius Hawke directly, addressed to Ellis Ward's office, which meant Hawke had done his own research and decided to remove the intermediary. Jackson and Lily stood in Ellis's office and read it together. It was 8 lines long. In the first 4, Hawke withdrew the property claims. All of them. Clean. No conditions attached. In the 5th line, he acknowledged the marriage as legally binding. In the 6th line, he stated that all contact should be directed through Ellis Ward,
and that he had instructed Fletcher to return to Philadelphia. In the seventh line, and this was the line that made Lily reach out and grip the edge of Ellis's desk, he wrote, "I trust my daughter is in capable hands." Not an apology, not love, not anything that came close to what a father owed a daughter. But from Cornelius Hawke, Jackson suspected, it was the closest thing to a concession the man had ever written in his life. The eighth line was a single instruction to Ellis regarding the formal transfer of Lily's inheritance, her mother's estate, held in a Philadelphia bank, that Hawke had apparently been managing without Lily's knowledge or consent. Ellis looked up from the wire. "That last part," he said carefully. "That's significant. The inheritance amount is—" he paused. "Substantial." Lily had not moved. She was staring at the wire with an expression Jackson couldn't read. Not joy exactly. Not relief. Something more complicated and more honest than either of those. The expression of a person receiving something they'd stopped believing would ever come, and not quite knowing how to hold it. "He's cutting me off," she said quietly. "He's releasing you," Ellis said, which, from his position, likely feels like the same thing. "What made him fold?" Jackson asked. Ellis set down the wire. "Fletcher came back and told him the truth, I expect, that the legal position was losing, that the cost was going to be high, and that the daughter he sent him to retrieve was standing in a lawyer's office in New Mexico with her husband and a will and no intention of moving." He looked at Jackson. "And possibly Fletcher told him something else." "What?" "That she looked well," Ellis said simply. "Sometimes that's the thing that closes a door." They rode home in a quiet that was different from any quiet they'd had before. This one had weight to it, but not the bad kind. The kind that came after something hard was over, and the body didn't quite know how to release itself from the readiness it had been holding. Halfway home, Lily said, "I'm not sure how I feel." "You don't have to know yet." "I keep waiting to feel relieved, and instead I feel—" She stopped. "Empty isn't the right word. Like a room after furniture's been moved out. You can see the shapes where things used to be." He understood that better than she might have expected. "That goes away," he said. "Mostly." She looked at him. She knew he wasn't just talking about her father. "How long?" she asked. "Depends on what you put in the room instead." He kept his eyes on the road. "Took me 3 years to start putting things in. Probably could have started sooner." She was quiet for a moment. "What made you start?" He thought about it honestly. "A woman showed up off a wagon and made coffee and told me my flue was blocked." He glanced at her. "I hadn't had anyone tell me something needed fixing in a long time. It was unexpectedly useful." She looked at him. Then she laughed. The same surprised, unguarded laugh she'd given him that day in the kitchen. The one that came out before she could manage it. And this time, she didn't pull it back. She let it go, and it went out into the summer air, and it sounded exactly right. That evening, he went back to the room. He went alone while Lily was in the kitchen, and he stood in the doorway and looked at it for the last time the way it had been. The quilt, the desk with the letter gone from it now, just the empty surface. The portrait, the wildflowers she'd left, bright yellow against the window. He walked to the portrait and stood in front of it. "I'm all right," he said, out loud, to the room, to the specific quality of silence that had always lived there. "I think you knew I would be. You were always better at knowing things than I was." He straightened the portrait on the wall. It had been slightly crooked for 3 years, and he'd never fixed it. He fixed it now. He walked back out and left the door open behind him. She was at the table when he came back to the kitchen. She had the ledger open, the ranch accounts, and she was working through something with that focused efficiency he'd come to know as specifically hers. She looked up when he came in. She looked at his face. She didn't ask. She just reached across the table and moved the coffee cup to his side, without being asked to. He sat down. They sat there together at the kitchen table with the summer evening coming through the window and the ledger open between them. After a while, she said, "You're overpaying the fee account again. Haskell's raised the rate on the second grade hay by 8 cents and charged you for first grade."
Write him a letter about it.
"I already did." She turned the ledger to show him. 2 days ago. He hasn't responded yet, but he will. He looked at the letter she'd drafted in the margin of the ledger page. Clean, direct, polite, and utterly without room for argument. Exactly the way she handled everything she decided to handle. "Lily," he said. She looked up. "I want you to know something." He looked at her straight, the way a man looked at something he wasn't going to look away from. Not because the situation required it, and not because there was legal strategy in it. "I want you to know it on its own terms." She went still. "I'm glad you got off that wagon," he said. "I'm glad you needed a door, and mine was the one you found. I'm glad you made coffee and told me about the flu and walked into that barn without being asked." He paused. "And I'm glad you're still here." She held his gaze for a long moment, that careful, measuring look, counting up the numbers he hadn't asked her to count. Then she said, "I burned all the correspondence from the Whitmore agency the morning after Cross left town. I didn't tell you." He waited. "The letter from Clara, the original correspondence, everything that connected me to Philadelphia, to the name I'd been traveling under, to the path I'd used to get here." She looked at him. "I burned it because I'd made a decision, and I didn't want a way back to exist." "What decision?" "That this was where I was going to live," she said, "however it turned out. Whatever your father wired, and whatever Fletcher brought with him, and whatever any court in any state decided." Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "I decided I was home, and I stopped carrying the way out." He looked at her. Outside, the summer evening was doing what summer evenings did on the ranch, cooling slow, the land releasing the heat of the day in small breaths, the animals settling. Everything he'd built over 22 years doing what it always did, persisting. "Then I reckon that's settled," he said. She smiled, not the careful, managed, almost smile she'd arrived with. A real one, the kind that changed the whole shape of her face and made the kitchen feel like a different room entirely. Warmer, fuller, more alive than any room in this house had felt in a very long time. "I reckon it is," she said. He opened the room the next morning, not ceremoniously, not with words or gestures or anything that needed witness. He simply walked down the back hallway, took the key out of the lock, and opened the door wide and let the summer light and the summer air move through it the way they'd been waiting 3 years to do. He took the quilt outside and beat the winter out of it and hung it on the line. He opened the window and left it open. He carried the writing desk to a different room where it could be used, and he moved the portrait to the sitting room where the light was better. He left the wildflowers exactly where Lily had put them. That evening she moved her things from the small back room into the room that had the east window and the iron bed frame his mother had left him. And she did it practically, without ceremony, folding her dresses into the dresser drawers and hanging her good coat on the hook behind the door. When she was done, she came and stood beside him on the front porch where he was watching the last of the light go out of the sky. "The ledger work for next quarter," she said. "I've been thinking about the south pasture rotation. If we move the cattle to the east section in September, we recover the south yield by spring and the feed costs drop about 30%.
"You've been thinking about next spring," he said. "I've been thinking about several springs," she said. He looked at her. She was looking out at the land, his land, her land, their land, with the expression of a woman who had run a very long way and looked down and found solid ground under her feet and decided to stop running, decided to stand, decided to stay. He had loved one woman in his life, and she had taught him what love was supposed to cost and what it was supposed to return, and what it meant to build something with another person that was bigger and more durable than either of them alone. He had thought when she died that he understood the full shape of what he'd had, and that understanding it meant he had to keep it the way it was, preserved, locked, untouched. He had been wrong about that. He reached over and took Lily's hand where it rested on the porch railing. She looked down at his hand over hers. Then she looked up at him. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. The summer night came in over the pasture, the way it had come in every night for 22 years, over this land and this house and this life that he had built from nothing and nearly lost to grief and had, finally, stubbornly, in the particular slow way of a man who needed a woman to tell him his flue was blocked before he'd look up, found his way back to. Lillian Wylie stood on that porch and did not let go of his hand. And Jackson Wylie, who had once burned a letter to keep himself safe from exactly this, held on. They had both run from different things and arrived at the same place, and the place was real, and the ground was solid, and the door at the end of the hallway was open, and neither one of them was going anywhere. That was the whole of it. That was enough. That was everything.